welcome back. For 20 years, the Sikh Coalition has defended Sikh civil liberties in the courtroom, classroom, community, and halls of Congress. The coalition is often the first and only line of defense for Sikh civil rights in America. Whether it's working to secure safer schools or prevent hate and discrimination, or creating equal employment opportunities, or empowering local Sikh communities, the Sikh Coalition's goal is to create a social climate in which Sikh Americans can live with dignity without being targeted for violence or discrimination. Joining me to share more details on the matter, I'm joined by the Senior Policy and Advocacy Manager at the Sikh Coalition, Nikki Singh. And Nikki, good to have you.
Hi, Darren. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And so when we talk about your organization really representing an underrepresented group of people.
Yeah, I think you did a great job at kind of summarizing a lot of the work that our organization does. And I'll just add a little bit more background. The Sikh Coalition was founded by community volunteers on the night of September 11th in response to a torrent of violent attacks against Sikh Americans throughout the United States. So in those early days, a group of Sikhs decided to take a stand against the civil rights abuses that our community faces. And so now the Sikh Coalition has transformed into the largest Sikh American advocacy and community development organization in the United States. And like you said, our work and our team, we aim to create safer schools, prevent hate and discrimination, create equal employment opportunities, empower Sikh community members across the US, and just educate the larger American public about the Sikh faith and tradition.
And when we talk about hate and discrimination, obviously that's a real thing, and the Sikh community has seen a lot of that. Give us a little bit about what maybe we don't know when it comes to hate and discrimination within the Sikh community.
Yeah, unfortunately, Sikhs have been targeted by hate since they came to this country over a century ago. For example, in the early 1900s in Bellingham, Washington, lumberjacks attacked hundreds of Sikh mill workers in their homes, beating them, stealing their valuables, forcing them out of the city. And this became known as the Bellingham riots. And so, those Sikhs have seen discrimination and harassment and violence since we've been in this country. We really saw an uptick in that after September 11th. The first fatal hate crime casualty in a post 9/11 America was Balbir Singh Sodhi, who's a Sikh immigrant who was living in Mesa, Arizona, a small business owner, and he was shot and killed outside of his gas station. We saw in 2012, a gunman with neo-Nazi ties killed 7 Sikhs at a Gurdwara, a Sikh house of worship in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. And this massacre remains one of the deadliest acts of violence in an American house of worship in our nation's history. And only since 2015 has the FBI even started tracking anti-Sikh hate crimes after a long campaign by our organization, by ally organizations. And since anti-Sikh hate has started to be tracked, Sikhs have consistently been among the top 5 most targeted faith groups. So, it really just validates some of our conservative estimates that Sikhs remain hundreds of times more likely to be targeted by hate in the US.
Yeah. And with that, there comes the need for policy advocacy and really raising your voice for awareness. What's been on the table for you lately by way of policy initiatives?
So the Sikh Coalition is a national organization. So we do work at the federal level as well as locally. And so federally, in May, President Biden signed into law the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. And it's a really important first step to countering the threat of hate in America. And it's the first significant piece of federal hate crime legislation in 12 years. Thankfully, the bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support in response to some of the anti-Asian hate that has surged during the pandemic. But also important to note that it includes the Jabara Hire No Hate Act, which will modernize hate crime reporting and provide new resources for survivors. So the Sikh Coalition has been advocating for the passage of the No Hate Act's important provisions since it was first introduced in 2019. And while this is a historic first step forward, it's far from the end. Our organization will continue to fight for better state-level hate crime legislation, mandatory federal hate crime reporting, and other policy improvements. So some of the work, there is legislation at the state level that we're looking at as well in Wyoming, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, California, and then even here, in New York City, we're working on a religious literacy resolution. It's City Council Resolution 1257, and it would call on the Department of Education to provide age-appropriate religious diversity curricula for all students and to offer professional development for teachers in this area. So, doing so will make a safer, more educational, and more inclusive learning environment for students of all faith traditions. So I really would encourage people to reach out to their city council members and ask them to co-sponsor Resolution 1257.
How would you measure the fact of awareness? I mean, because when you think about violence and hate in the Sikh community, discrimination that goes on, this awareness campaign, I know you've launched it. It's, your organization is about 20 years in, but yet and still many people are still late to the table in addressing some of these issues. What are you finding by way of awareness? Are people becoming more and more aware, or is there an ignorance, if you will, to these crimes?
I think there certainly is an ignorance and just a lack of awareness in general about who the Sikh community is. And I think that's why, organizationally, we try to take a really holistic approach at addressing, the challenges that the Sikh community faces. So that means doing work in education, literally in schools, but also just raising general awareness about who Sikhs are, while also simultaneously working to hold those in power accountable and advocating for policy change federally at the state level and locally as well.
Yeah. What would you want people to know when it comes to knowing about the Sikh community?
I think what's important to learn about the Sikh community is that we've been here for a long time, and I would just encourage people to take an effort to learn about who Sikhs are. I think all of us can take steps to combat hate. It's really important to consistently speak up, stand in solidarity, hold people accountable, including those with influence. And not just for the community, not just for the Sikh community, but that accountability is necessary when we witness racism, xenophobia, and any type of bigotry against any minority community. And I think if I could leave people with one message is that Sikhs are incredibly resilient, and although we've faced a lot of hate, violence, harassment, discrimination, we really continue to meet those challenges through faith and with resolve.
Speak to us a little bit about the Jabara No Hate Act, I should say.
Sure. So it's an act that would modernize hate crime laws. It is, the first significant, it's included as part of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. It's the first significant piece of federal legislation on hate crimes that we've seen in 12 years. So the goal with the Jabara Higher Hate Crime Act is to modernize hate crime reporting, but also to provide new resources for survivors.
And so as we look forward to some things on the table right now, what can people participate in terms of being allies in a time like this?
I think at the local level, as I mentioned, one of the things that we're working on is that city council resolution. According to a survey that we did in 2018, 62% of turban-wearing Sikh students in Queens, New York, experienced bullying. Another report that we did in 2014 showed that 67% of turban Sikh students across multiple geographic areas experienced bullying, which is a rate that is more than twice the national average. And so it's really important for people to take action and to call on their elected officials to support this kind of legislation, especially at the local level, because that has such an impact on people's day-to-day lives. And so that's definitely something I would encourage people to do. But on a broader scale, I think, just taking the time and effort to learn about the Sikh community.
Yeah. When you talk about the federal legislation, I mean, obviously federal legislation has been enacted, but let's talk about it on a local front. Talk to me about elected officials and how supportive have they been to your cause?
Yeah, I think elected officials, I think it varies. Thankfully, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act passed with bipartisan support. I think at the state level, it has definitely been challenging. We're looking at hate crime legislation in Wyoming, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, California. And I think there has been a struggle by a lot of civil rights groups, not just our organization, to just educate elected officials about the importance of having hate crime legislation. And so we continue to try to do a lot of that work so that, not just the Sikh community, but other vulnerable communities are protected as well.
And so as we're moving towards the summer, of course, a lot of people going back outdoors and a lot of things are happening. Talk to us about the community and what's happening as we approach the summer?
Yeah, the Sikh community is incredibly resilient. I think, there, as with everyone, there's an excitement to kind of move towards summer, to be able to, community in general, or Sangat, as we say, is really important to the Sikh faith. And so, obviously, with the pandemic and people having to stay inside, I think there was a real loss of that sense of community. And so I think people are excited to get back to that in person, and not just having to do that virtually, but also, community service work is really important. And so being able to be out there and do some of that work, I think people are excited about doing that again as well.
Yeah. And so as we talk about legislation, a lot of policy, a lot of initiatives that are out there on the state level and definitely in the federal level. Talk to us a little bit more about the state, because as we talk about New York State, it seems like that's a little bit more of a hard nut to crack. And what kind of pushback are you getting? Because it seems like a no-brainer on many fronts, but yet and still, I know that you're getting some resistance.
Sure. So I'll start by saying that we're a nonpartisan organization, and so our work is really to connect with elected officials, on both sides of the aisle, and try to raise awareness about hate crimes that exist across the U.S. And so, one of the ways that we do that is through advocating for better data and reporting. Part of the challenge there is that a lot of the time law enforcement is just unaware of who the Sikh community is. So hate crimes, either they aren't categorized as Sikh or they are miscategorized. And then that creates a challenge, right? We know that data drives policy. And so for us to be able to advocate for legislation, we have to be able to look at the data. And so, we really start at the local level, trying to advocate for better education, better reporting, better understanding of who Sikhs are, to then translate that data into effective policy.
Yeah, you've got police community relations, which is really, at an all-time high in terms of tension. Are you finding right now that your relationship with the police community, when it comes to talking about the issues, talking about the hate, talking about the discrimination, is being well received, better received? How do you describe it?
Yeah, we've worked with a few different city agencies, specifically the New York City Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes. They hold, I want to say, quarterly meetings where members of the NYPD's hate crime task force join as well. And so, they've been really open to community dialogue. I know that they have recently created within the NYPD a task force specifically to address anti-Asian hate. But I think there is a lot more that can be done just to raise awareness, to report better, more efficiently, and I think stronger partnerships can be built with community organizations.
Yeah, before we leave, please give us an opportunity to know how can people connect with your organization and really be an ally.
Yeah, I would love for people to read more about the Sikh Coalition's work. You can follow us on Instagram at Sikh Coalition, visit our website, sikhcoalition.org. And, as a staff, we're all really accessible and happy to help the community however we can.
Nikki Singh, thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums from the Sikh organization. Glad to have you. And of course, come on back.
Thank you.
All righty. Nikki Singh, our guest on the Social Justice Forums.